Ever wondered why so many cartoons from the 1970s looked like animated daydreams gone off the rails? It was the decade when animators swapped logic for imagination and gave us visuals that melted, morphed, and refused to make sense in the best way possible. These weren't cute Saturday morning shows. They were strange, colorful experiments that twisted reality itself. Get ready for 12 70s cartoons that were way too trippy to forget. Fantastic Planet, 1973. At first glance, Fantastic Planet looks like a children's storybook that someone left out in the sun too long. French animator René Laloux's surreal masterpiece doesn't just drift into the strange, it dives in head first. Imagine blue-skinned giants keeping humans as pets meditating in cosmic rituals, while tiny people try desperately to survive. That's the premise, and it only gets stranger from there. The film is set on the distant planet Egom, where the alien drogs treat humans called Alms as either playthings or pests. The hand-drawn animation looks like a fever dream, stitched together from magazine cutouts and Renaissance sketches. Every movement feels slightly unnatural, every sound just a little too echoing, like you're trapped inside someone else's dream. But beneath the psychedelic imagery lies a sharp allegory about control and rebellion. The Alms rise up, but not in the typical heroic way. It's slow, quiet, almost hypnotic rebellion, told through floating shapes and whispered sound effects. When it premiered at the Cannes Film Festival, critics couldn't decide if it was science fiction philosophy or just a very long hallucination. It went on to win the Grand Prix, becoming a cult favorite for artists and musicians. Decades later, it still feels more modern than half the CGI blockbusters that try to look weird. Fantastic Planet wasn't just trippy. It was transcendental, a cosmic painting that dared you to stare too long. And once you did, you were never quite the same again. Fantastic Voyage, The Animated Adventures, 1973. What if exploring the human body felt like drifting through a dream? That's exactly what Fantastic Voyage, The Animated Adventures delivered. Loosely based on the 1966 live-action movie, this short-lived filmation series took science fiction and turned it into a weekly burst of color, sound, and surreal energy that looked more like abstract art than a children's show. The premise was simple. A miniaturized crew travels inside a human body aboard the microscopic ship Voyager. But instead of realism, the animators went all in on imagination. Blood cells looked like glowing planets, nerve impulses pulsed like strobe lights, and the inside of the body resembled a living galaxy. Every scene shimmered with saturated reds, blues, and violets that seemed to breathe along with the music. The show's eerie synthesizer soundtrack only added to the hypnotic effect. Viewers expecting Saturday Morning Adventure got a slow-motion light show with dialogue somewhere in the background. It was supposed to be educational. Instead, it felt like an out-of-body experience. Each episode blurred the line between science and surrealism. One minute, the characters were explaining antibodies. The next, they were lost in an infinite swirl of color. The animation wasn't about accuracy. It was about rhythm, visualizing the body as a mysterious shifting world that refused to stay still. Though Fantastic Voyage lasted only a season, its bold style lived on. Later, sci-fi animation borrowed its glowing palettes and fluid design. Watching it today feels less like a cartoon and more like floating through a living painting, proof that in the 1970s, even educational shows could be completely gloriously trippy. Wizards, 1977. If you blended Tolkien World War II, documentaries, and a stack of underground comics, you'd get Wizards Ralph Bakshi's strangest creation and one of the most mind-bending animated features ever made. On the surface, it's a fantasy adventure about two battling brothers, Avatar, a kind-hearted wizard, and Black Wolf, a mutant sorcerer obsessed with rediscovering ancient technology. But that's just the beginning. The movie takes place in a post-apocalyptic future where humanity has wiped itself out, leaving behind a world of fairies, elves, and radiation-mutated monsters. It sounds whimsical until you realize Black Wolf rallies his armies by playing actual war propaganda films. Yes, real footage of marching soldiers projected over animated demons. Kids expecting a magical fairy tale got a crash course in existential dread. Bakshi's world is drawn like a dream, on the edge of collapse, smoky skies, ghostly battlefields, and forests that look alive, but somehow haunted. He mixed rotoscoping with traditional animation, giving the battles a hyper-real ghostly motion that felt both alive and wrong. Critics didn't know what to make of it. Some praised it as visionary art, others called it incoherent madness, but audiences couldn't look away. It was part fantasy, part history lesson, and part fever dream about the dangers of obsession with the past. What makes Wizards unforgettable isn't just its weirdness, it's the emotional punch hiding beneath the chaos. At its core, it's a story about hope trying to survive in a world addicted to its own darkness. By the time the final confrontation hits, you're not sure if you've watched a cartoon or a prophecy. Either way, you walk away blinking, wondering if you just saw something beautiful or something that was warning you all along. The Point, 1971. Imagine a place where everything has a point, literally. Trees, houses, even the people. Everything except a little boy named Oblio. That's the setup for The Point, a made-for-TV animated special that looks innocent, but hides a swirl of surrealism, philosophy, and quiet rebellion beneath its cheerful narration. Written and scored by musician Harry Nilsson, and narrated by a rotating lineup that included Ringo Starr in later releases, the film is a gentle yet profoundly strange journey about conformity and identity. Oblio, the only round-headed boy in a land of pointy ones, is exiled to the pointless forest, a place that sounds absurd until you realize it mirrors every outsider's struggle to fit in. The animation by Fred Wolf is simple but hypnotic, filled with shifting shapes and bright colors that feel halfway between a dream and a lava lamp. Scenes stretch and dissolve in rhythm with Nielsen's haunting soundtrack. Each song, Me and My Arrow, Think About Your Troubles, carries more emotional depth than most entire movies of the era. But what truly made The Point so trippy was its message. It never spoon-fed morals or tidy resolutions. Instead, it whispered about individuality and perception, that sometimes the most pointless people are the ones who see life most clearly. For kids, it was a comforting bedtime story. For adults, it was a quiet revolution in narrative form. When it aired, parents didn't know what to make of it. Was it a fable? A metaphor? A music video before music videos existed? Whatever it was, it stuck. Decades later, animators and storytellers still cite The Point as proof that you can make something deeply human without explaining everything. Because sometimes the trippiest stories are the ones that feel almost too honest. Heavy Traffic, 1973. Ralph Bakshi's Heavy Traffic didn't just push boundaries. It smashed them and threw the pieces into a blender of animation and live action. If Fantastic Planet was surreal and The Point was poetic, Heavy Traffic was gritty, weird, and painfully real. It's not so much a movie as a hallucinatory sketchbook of 70s urban chaos. The story follows Michael, a struggling cartoonist trapped in a collapsing New York neighborhood. His parents fight constantly. The streets outside are filled with noise and confusion, and the city itself feels alive, breathing, twitching, and slowly losing its mind. Bakshi used rotoscoping real photos and snippets of live footage behind the animated characters, giving everything a grimy documentary feel. Critics were stunned by how personal it felt. Every scene looked like a mural come to life, full of odd characters who seem both hilarious and heartbreaking. One moment, a dance sequence spins out of control in flashing color. The next, the world collapses back into silence and despair. It's not about the plot, it's about the mood, the atmosphere of a world on the edge. Heavy Traffic became one of the earliest examples of animation as adult storytelling, not because it was inappropriate, but because it was unflinchingly honest about struggle and survival. Bakshi once said the movie was his diary drawn frame by frame, and you can feel that in every sketchy, imperfect line. Audiences were divided. Some saw genius, others saw madness. But years later, its influence is everywhere in graphic novels and music videos, even in the raw storytelling of modern animated dramas. Heavy Traffic is the kind of film you don't just watch. You fall into it spinning through its chaos until you realize it's really about finding art in the wreckage. The Phantom Tollbooth, 1970. If Alice had fallen through a toll booth instead of a rabbit hole, she would have landed here. The Phantom Tollbooth begins as a quiet story about a bored boy named Milo and ends as one of the most visually surreal animated films of its decade. Directed by Chuck Jones, the legendary mind behind the Looney Tunes, it mixed live action and animation in ways that felt like a dream, trying to explain logic to itself. The movie opens in dull, gray live-action Los Angeles. Milo is restless, sighing at the emptiness of his world. Then, a mysterious toll booth appears in his room, and suddenly, color explodes. He drives through it and lands in a land where numbers and words are alive, literally. Mountains talk, watchdogs keep time, and entire cities argue about the meaning of meaning. Each world Milo visits is stranger than the last. Dixionopolis, where words are eaten like candy, Digitopolis, ruled by the mathemagician, and the Mountains of Ignorance, where strange creatures lurk in shifting light. Every background glows like a neon chalkboard sketch come to life. While marketed as a children's adventure, the Phantom Tollbooth was closer to a philosophy lesson disguised as a fever dream. The film's rhythm feels fluid and unpredictable, one moment cheerful, the next contemplative. It's a strange cerebral journey that asks whether knowledge can be fun, and whether imagination can ever be controlled. Audiences in 1970 didn't quite know what to make of it. It wasn't funny enough for kids or simple enough for adults, but decades later, it's celebrated as an artistic gem. The Phantom Tollbooth proved that sometimes the trippiest journeys start with the simplest question. What if curiosity itself became a road? Allegro Non Troppo, 1976. Italy's answer to Fantasia, but darker, funnier, and infinitely stranger. Allegro Non Troppo took classical music and turned it into a satire of human nature, all wrapped in animation that shifted from beautiful to bizarre in seconds. Director Bruno Bozzetto wasn't interested in perfection. He wanted emotion, irony, and chaos. And he delivered all three in operatic style. Each musical segment feels like its own short film, moving from tender to twisted. Claude Debussy's Afternoon of a Faun becomes a lonely creature's tragicomic love story. Ravel's Bolero transforms into a cosmic evolution sequence where life rises from an empty soda bottle and ends in explosive self-destruction. It's visual poetry with a mischievous grin. But it's not just the music. The live-action framing scenes mock the very idea of art as something pure or untouchable. You see animators literally locked in chains by their producers sketching under absurd conditions while an orchestra plays on. It's self-aware, it's ridiculous, and it's genius. When Allegro Non Troppo premiered, audiences didn't know whether to laugh or applaud. Some critics called it blasphemy against classical art. Others called it one of the most creative films of the decade. The animation's hand-painted detail and its sharp social commentary still look astonishing today. It was trippy not because it tried to shock, but because it made you feel art happening to you, swirling, morphing, laughing at itself. Allegro Non Troppo wasn't afraid to be beautiful and grotesque at once. By the time the final note fades, you're not sure if you just watched a comedy or a cosmic revelation. Either way, you'll never hear Bolero the same way again. The Mouse and His Child, 1977. On the surface, The Mouse and His Child looks like a gentle animated tale about two wind-up toys searching for home. But within minutes, it becomes clear this isn't your typical children's movie. It's a surreal poetic odyssey about existence, freedom, and the strange melancholy of being alive. Based on Russell Hoban's novel and produced by Sanrio, the film follows a mechanical father and son, mouse duo, who tumble from a toy shop into a vast, unpredictable world. What begins as a simple journey turns into something much deeper, part dream, part nightmare. The landscapes shimmer like watercolor hallucinations. Moonlit junkyards, glowing ponds, and endless highways lined with forgotten toys. Every scene feels slightly offbeat, as if time itself has loosened. The characters they meet, a philosophizing frog, a circus of broken dolls, and a manipulative rat named Manny, reflect the weird beauty and danger of the wider world. The animation is lush, yet haunting with painterly detail that blurs the line between fairy tale and fever dream. Critics were divided. Some called it too bleak for children, others hailed it as a masterpiece of mood and meaning. What everyone agreed on was its tone oddly spiritual, wistful, and visually hypnotic. The movie doesn't comfort you. It lingers asking quiet questions about purpose and connection. By the time the credits roll, The Mouse and His Child has transformed from a toy story into a meditation on what it means to be real. It's whimsical, heartbreaking, and deeply strange, the kind of 70s animation that doesn't just entertain you, it stays in your head like a half-remembered dream. French Windows, 1972. Before MTV existed, before music videos ruled pop culture, there was French Windows, an animated short, so hypnotic it could stop you mid-sentence. Created by British artist Ian Eames and set to Pink Floyd's One of These Days, it became the unofficial anthem for anyone who believed animation could be pure emotion without a single word. At just a few minutes long, French Windows felt like stepping into a dream that had learned to breathe. Emes painted distorted and looped shapes that moved in perfect sync with the beat, transforming sound into color, rhythm into motion. It wasn't about story or character. It was about letting your eyes listen. The imagery drifts between abstraction and suggestion. Geometric patterns ripple into human silhouettes. then dissolve back into kaleidoscopic storms of light. It's hypnotic, almost meditative, like watching sound waves dance across the sky. The film was made using early experimental techniques, mixing traditional cell animation with rotoscoping and hand-painted overlays. When the short aired on British television, viewers didn't know what hit them. Was it art? Was it music? Was it both? Critics quickly labeled it visual jazz, and it spread through art schools and late-night screenings like wildfire. Even Pink Floyd noticed Hermès went on to collaborate with the band, officially helping shape their visual identity for years. What makes French Windows so unforgettable is its simplicity. It doesn't demand interpretation. It invites you to feel. In a decade full of noisy experimentation, this one quiet, glowing film reminded audiences that trippy didn't have to mean chaotic. Sometimes the most mind-bending journey is the one that simply lets the music move through you. Fantastic Four, 1978. If you thought superheroes were immune to the psychedelic wave of the 70s, Fantastic Four would prove you wrong. This short-lived animated series from Departie Freleng Productions took Marvel's classic heroes Mr. Fantastic, the Invisible Woman, the Human Torch, and the Thing, and dropped them into a swirling, color-saturated universe that looked less like New York City and more like a cosmic lava lamp. Because of rights issues, the Human Torch was replaced by a wisecracking robot named Herbie, a choice that instantly gave the show its weird charm. Instead of straightforward comic book action episodes, often felt like kaleidoscopic daydreams. Villains floating through glowing portals, sound effects echoing like underwater vibrations, and laser battles painted in neon streaks. The animation was both cheap and mesmerizing. Backgrounds pulsed with gradients of pink and green. Perspective bent and twisted in ways that defied logic. Even the hero's dialogue seemed to echo into infinite space. Watching Fantastic Four wasn't just following a story. It was like drifting through a comic book that kept melting in your hands. Critics called it campy. Fans called it hypnotic. The show ran for only one season, but it captured that unmistakable 70s mood. Bright colors, bizarre energy, and a refusal to take itself too seriously. Kids tuned in for adventure and stayed because it felt like nothing else on TV. Decades later, animation historians still point to Fantastic Four as one of the strangest superhero adaptations ever made. It turned science fiction into psychedelia and made cosmic chaos feel cool. Every episode was a reminder that even superheroes could get lost in the wild imagination of the 70s, and somehow that made them even more super. Down and Dirty Duck, 1974. You might not expect a cartoon about a duck to leave you dazed, but Down and Dirty Duck is no ordinary pond story. Produced by Roger Corman, the king of low-budget cult movies, it's often called the other animated film that tried to out-weird Fritz the Cat. And in its own eccentric way, it succeeded. The film follows Willard, an insurance clerk who gets swept into a chaotic odyssey with a talking duck named Jolly. From there, it's a non-stop flood of surreal jokes, visual gags, and bizarre detours that feel like a comic strip gone rogue. The animation style changes constantly. One scene looks like a sketchbook the next, like a psychedelic poster come alive. Director Charles Swenson built the movie on sheer improvisation. The humor is absurdist and unpredictable, poking fun at everything from bureaucracy to pop culture. What makes it so trippy is its rhythm. Dialogue overlaps backgrounds, morph mid-scene, and moments that seem like nonsense suddenly hit with strange emotional clarity. Critics at the time didn't know what to do with it. Some dismissed it as chaos. Others praised its fearless weirdness. But audiences who discovered it later realized it was decades ahead of its time, the kind of wild experimentation that paved the way for adult animation's surreal comedy streak. It's messy, colorful, and unapologetically strange, a chaotic time capsule of the 70s, when artists were more interested in exploring ideas than explaining them. Down and Dirty Duck might not make sense in a traditional way, but that's the beauty of it. It's the animated version of free jazz, improvised, irreverent, and unforgettable once you've heard its tune. The Pink Panther Show, the surreal era, 1969 to 1978. Everyone remembers the Pink Panther for its smooth jazz theme and silent comedy, but few realize just how bizarre it got by the mid-70s. As the series evolved, it drifted further and further from slapstick toward pure abstraction. The result? Some of the trippiest, most artistically daring animation ever aired on mainstream television. By the later seasons, the plots barely mattered. The Panther wandered through minimalist backgrounds that looked like modern art museums, endless white rooms, impossible staircases, melting furniture. Objects appeared and disappeared without reason. Colors shifted with mood instead of logic. It was like a cartoon made by Salvador Dali and choreographed by a jazz musician. The animators at DePatie Freleng Productions embraced creative freedom that most studios wouldn't dare attempt. They used silence as a weapon, timing gags so precisely that each pause felt like a drum beat in an invisible song. Without dialogue, the Panther became a symbol of cool isolation, a pink ghost drifting through an absurd world that never played fair. Kids laughed at the slapstick. Adults noticed the existential undertones. Animation. Historians later compared the series' mid-70s stretch to experimental film, stylish, minimal, and hypnotically strange. It didn't need to shock. It simply bent reality with a wink and a shrug. By the time the decade ended, the Pink Panther show had turned into something beyond comedy, a masterclass in surreal rhythm and design. It proved that you didn't need words, big budgets, or even reason to create something mesmerizing. All you needed was confidence, color, and one very cool cat. So, maybe the 70s weren't just about bell-bottoms and disco. They were about artists daring to let animation drift off the rails. These 12 trippy cartoons didn't play by the rules, and that's exactly why they still stand out. Which one of these wild visions would you dare to re-watch with the lights off? Tell us in the comments, and if your brain survived this journey, hit subscribe for more strange corners of animation history.